Hello and welcome to On the Record. About 9 months ago, we invited former state Senate candidate John Lear to appear on this program to talk not about politics, but about UFOs, unidentified flying objects. A lot has happened in the interim period. John Lear has gone on to appear on other television programs. He also delivered wildly popular lectures at local libraries where overflow crowds came to get more information on visitors from other planets. And plenty has happened in his field as well. Joining us today to talk about the very latest in UFO research is John Lear. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, George.
To begin with, Mr. Lear, you are, of course, from a very prominent Nevada family. You've flown for major airlines, set all kinds of records. You've even worked for the CIA. How would you convince people to begin with that you're not a crackpot?
Well, that'd be kind of tough, but it'd be self-evident by, what I've done and where I am now. For one thing, I am an airline captain for one of the major charter firms, and I'm the only pilot that holds every FAA airman certificate. So starting right there, it has to have a little credibility.
The last time you were here, you told a pretty fantastic story. What you've been working on this for, 13, 14 months now?
Right.
All right, and what have you, in all the research that you and the people you're associated with have done, in a nutshell, what's your conclusion?
Well, let me tell you, when I left you last time, I went on a trip, a 4-week trip, Arizona, Colorado, and Mexico, loaded up my truck with video equipment and audio equipment, and I went to talk to people who would not talk to me over the phone, but would brief me face-to-face. And I talked to CIA, DIA, Air Force, Army, and when I got back in last December, I sat down and I kind of wrote the bottom line of what I felt was going on. But what I'd like to do is tell you, the last time I left I said two things that were wrong. One is the Myers case, with the flying saucers that you had on the promo there, and I said it was a fraud.
Yeah.
I was wrong. I have every reason to believe that it was a true case.
Okay.
And the other thing is I said that President Reagan did not know what was going on, and he does to a certain extent. But the President of the United States does not have a high enough clearance to know the whole thing. And it's interesting to note that above top secret, there's 38 levels of clearances.
Now, that's hard to buy, that the President, if somebody has a higher clearance than the President, he's not allowed to know. Who makes that decision?
If you think that's hard to buy, wait till you hear the rest of this stuff.
I mean, who makes that decision? No, sorry, we can't let Ronald Reagan know about this stuff.
It's an organization called MJ-12. It was established by President Truman by executive order in September 24th, 1947. And when Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected in 1952, he increased even the security requirements because he was military-oriented. And the military psych has a very disdain for elected officials. So he's the one that effectively let the reins of power of the executive office slip from the president into the hands of MJ-12, who runs everything now.
In a nutshell, you believe that the government obviously knows a lot more about UFOs and visitors from other planets than they're telling us. What is it that they know that we don't?
Well, it's a little bit more complex than that. Let me review what we talked about last time.
Okay.
We've recovered between 15 and 20 extraterrestrial flying saucers. We've tried to fly at least one. We recovered 3 in perfect condition. We have 30, and you say, how do you know this to be true, John, that we've recovered them? Well, yeah, because I have a friend at the test site, 3 friends who've seen it, who touched it.
Okay, you're jumping ahead of yourself. We have these vehicles. You say there's some of them at the test site. Explain that. How do you know that?
Because I have friends that fly up there, and they've seen them. So
now, what is it that they're doing with them at the test site?
They're trying to develop they're trying to take them apart and develop the technology. The guy who saw it said, John, just imagine that a SR-71, which is our super spy plane, just imagine one of those landed at a World War I base. That's about what, we're looking at. And the other thing he said is our planets are a lot better at taking things apart than they are putting them back together.
You actually have come across, since the last time I saw you, a document, something called Project Aquarius, that makes a reference to what's going on here in Nevada. You want to refer to that?
Yeah, that's right. It's the Aquarius document. It was given to a friend of mine, and there's a project called Snowbird, and it was the to test fly a recovered alien aircraft. Do you have it right there? Have that document right there?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's this one right here, and it talks about Project Aquarius, and in the body of the document it says Project Snowbird, originally established in 1972. Its mission was to test fly a recovered alien aircraft. This project is continuing in Nevada.
Well, what is this document? Where did you get this?
This was given to a friend of mine. There's part of MJ-12 that wants the truth to be known. Basically, MJ-12 is military top-heavy, so most of them don't want the truth to be known. They want it's something that they don't want the public to know. Well, there are several reasons why they don't. They're afraid of public panic. It's a typical government ploy of, we know what's best for you, and we think it's best that you don't know this.
You also believe that MJ-12 made a deal with what you call EBES, people from other planets.
Yes, in the latter part of the 60s, I believe we made a deal, and the deal was that in exchange for super technology, super weapons technology, we would agree to ignore the abductions that were going on and suppress the information on the cattle mutilations.
The abductions, why do they take place, and how many of them are there?
The abductions take place for three reasons. One is they're monitoring us, biological monitoring. The second reason is for the post-hypnotic suggestion. Something is supposedly going to occur within the next few years, 1 to 4 years, and the people who are abducted are going to be post-hypnotically programmed to go to a certain place and perform a certain function. And the third thing is genetic experiments. And you say, well, what kind of genetic experiments? Well, 2 years ago, in 1976, this magazine came out. It's one of Britain's most respected journals, and it had a very interesting letter in there. And I think we have it on, have it up.
Well, we have a picture that refers to that letter from the magazine.
Okay, well, this doctor did a...
now, it's a little picture of what looks like cells.
A computer chip, yeah.
I think it's going to come up here in just a second. That's it.
A doctor was doing an amniocentesis, and this is where they take a lady who's pregnant and take the fetal fluid and examine it for to see if there's any diseases. So he took it out and he noticed a little speck. So he kept enlarging it, enlarging under an electron microscope, and when he got it large enough to see what it was, he found a little computer chip attached to the chromosome. And so these doctors wrote a letter to anybody in the scientific field and in the Nature magazine, and said none of the possibilities we have been able to think of would seem appropriate for the amniotic fluid. So if anybody is able to suggest an answer to this mystery, we would like to have it. We are as intrigued as we are ignorant. And those are the 7 doctors there, Department of Medical Genetics, Churchill Hospital.
Apparently you were able to suggest an alternative. What are you saying it is?
Well, they're genetically manipulating us. It's very simple.
Now, you had said before when you were on this program that in your experience you'd seen evidence that aliens, when they abduct people, put something in the back of the neck, something BB-sized.
Yeah, or in the brain, and it's just very
lines.
interesting. A couple of weeks ago, Whitley Strieber, who wrote Communion, had some x-rays down there of his head that were taken about a month ago, and they showed the little BB-sized implants in his brain. And he carries those x-rays around, so you don't believe it? Here it is.
Genetic experiments, cattle mutilations, what do they want with us?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, but let me go back here. We've also recovered 30 alien bodies representing at least 3 different species of civilizations from far beyond our planetary system. And you and I were just talking before this about the only civilian that I know that's ever seen the bodies is Jackie Gleason. And the reason we know that is because his wife wrote a book which was never published and talked about him coming home. He was a great supporter of Nixon's. He had a home in upstate New York that was a huge round thing. It looked like a flying saucer, and it was called the Mothership. And also, Gleason had the largest private collection of UFO material. And somehow he got Nixon to give him a private briefing. They took him to Homestead Air Force Base, and they actually showed him the bodies. But he's the only civilian I know that ever saw them.
Of all the people, civilians, I mean, Jackie Gleason, you almost have to chuckle at that, don't you?
Yeah, I guess it created quite a profound change on his life. At least his wife said so in that book.
In the last couple of days, there's been something happen regarding something that's been seen on Mars, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at that. last couple of days, about a week ago, there was a release out of Washington. A group of scientists said we need to take a harder look at some photos that were taken on Mars several years ago, showing some rather unusual shapes and structures.
Yeah, it's very unusual. It was taken in 1976 by Viking, and NASA has ignored it up to now.
Maybe we can see those photos, the first one right off the bat. What are we seeing here?
That's in the Cydonia region of Mars, and you'll look at the top right-hand corner, you'll see a face, and that's called the face on Mars. Now, there's absolutely no possibility that that could have been naturally formed, and what they want to find out is who put it there, and Russia's a little bit ahead of us. They launched a probe last week, and they're launching one at the end of this week, or the end of this month, and they're going to see if they can find out what it is. Now, probably behind the scenes, NASA has probably studied it carefully. I don't have any confidence in NASA to tell the truth about UFOs or any of that stuff, but there's some footage we're going to show here that does look like a human head and like a trick of nature, but it's not. NASA says it's a trick of nature. The only trick here is the one that NASA's playing on the public. Now, if we can roll this tape here, this was taken by the astronauts.
This is tape taken by astronauts in space.
This is a shot of a booster from one of the capsules. Note the brightly lit objects as if they were just sitting there watching. You'll watch them disappear and reappear. Note how these bright lights fade in and fade out. It's just like they're sitting there watching us. This next shot, right after here, shows Earth from orbit. Right here. And look at all the little things happening there. It's a time-lapse photography. All the myriad of lights and objects reappearing and disappearing, moving down and up. Now watch towards the lower right-hand corner as this little squiggly object moves out to the top of the screen. It's coming up right here in just a moment here. Lower right-hand corner. There it is. Starts moving across the screen. Now that is really strange, but these are all UFOs taken by the astronauts. Now we have object footage from moon orbit. Those hexagonal shapes on the right are reflections, but now look to the left and you'll see three brightly lit objects which NASA claims are ice crystals. At my recent talk at the Clark County Library, I showed these films with NASA's explanation, and I asked how many of the 400 people believed in NASA's explanations, and not one person in the 400 believed their explanation. Now here it comes again. It's a very weird object there. Now the next shot, we're going to watch the lunar lander as it blasts off from the moon. Right here. Now, watch the lower left-hand corner of the screen. NASA says that this fast-flying object, UFO, is leaking propellant. Now watch, it'll come out of the left-hand portion and go to the top right. Now there's your leaking propellant. You see that? Okay, now we're going to watch orbiting vehicle again. On the lower left-hand side, the UFO will travel from the bottom to the top. NASA said this is more leaky propellant. It kind of makes you wonder how we ever had enough fuel to get back from these missions with all that leaking propellant. I wonder what kind of a... Now there's another object there, more leaking propellant. You wonder what secret they must be covering up to admit that the propellant leak is in the first place. Now here we have an object, a fairly good shot of a flying saucer right there. The first shot was better, but here's what NASA says. They say that that's an Earthrise from the front side of the, from looking at it from the back side of the moon. Well, I don't know how stupid they think we are, but the rays from the sun are parallel. And if the forward part of the moon is lit, then the Earth would be fully lit. So I just don't have any confidence in what they're telling us.
Now, there are a number of people like yourself who are interested in this and who are trying to get the facts out of the government. How easy is that to do? How secretive is this stuff?
It's the biggest secret in the history of mankind, and the government is not going to let this out. There is no way to get anything out under the Freedom of Information Act. And
what happens when you file a Freedom of Information Act suit on this subject?
They say that it's properly classified per executive order such and such, and you can't have it, period. That's all there is to it.
You've, among your research, now you found some documents. I don't know how you got these things out of the government, but I think we have a picture of this one as well. Yeah. It's labeled Top Secret National Security Information, November 18th, 1952. Now, why don't you tell me, this was prepared for President Eisenhower.
That was prepared for Eisenhower.
What is in this packet of information?
It tells about the recovery of the saucer in 1947, why they covered it up. It tells about the bodies they found. It tells how they tried to, how they did an autopsy. They tried to figure out where they came from. They told President-elect Eisenhower how important it was to keep the secret, and it was just his briefing. Now, this briefing came to a Hollywood producer interested in UFOs in a plain brown envelope, and it was in the form of 35-millimeter black and white film, undeveloped. And when he developed it, he found the first 8 frames were these documents. Then there was 5 blank frames, and then there was 8 more frames. And this top secret document tells about 2 crashes, one on July 2nd, 1947, and one on 6th of December, 1950. And talks about the implications for the national security, are of continuing importance in that the motives and ultimate intentions of these visitors remain completely unknown. Now, the end document was a letter from Truman to Forrestal, and he says...
Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense.
That's right. Dated September 24th, 1947, and he says, Dear Secretary Forrestal, as per our recent conversation on this matter, you are hereby authorized to proceed with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter, this matter will be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. It continues to be my feeling that any future considerations relative to the ultimate disposition of this matter should rest solely with the Office of the President following appropriate discussions with yourself, Dr. Bush, and the Director of Central Intelligence. So the first thing we find out to see if that document is legitimate is to write the Harry S. Truman Library, which we did. And we got this letter last year, and this says, President Truman's appointment records indicate that his only meeting with Dr. Bush between May and December 31st of 1947 was on September 24th, 1947. Dr. Bush was accompanied at the meeting by the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal.
Confirmation that this meeting about UFOs did take place on the date, so that this letter...
In all fairness, it doesn't say UFOs, but it's pretty obvious what they were discussing.
And this Dr. Bush, he pops up in other literature as well. He seems to be the point man for MJ-12 on the UFO stuff.
That's right. He keeps his name keeps popping up. Here's a letter from Dr. Robert I. Sarbacher. He was one of our most respected scientists. He was the president and chairman of the board of the Washington Institute of Technology. And this letter, written in 1983 to a friend of mine, says, relating to my own experience regarding recovered flying saucers, I had no association with any of the people involved in the recoveries and have no knowledge regarding the dates. He says John von Neumann was definitely involved, Dr. Vannevar Bush was definitely involved, and I think Dr. Robert Oppenheimer also. And he goes on to say, about the only thing I remember at this time is that certain materials reported to have come from flying saucer crashes were extremely light and very tough. And I'm sure our laboratories has analyzed them carefully. He also says there were reports that instruments or people operating these machines were also of very lightweight, sufficient to withstand the tremendous deceleration and acceleration associated with their machinery. I remember in talking with some of the people at the office that I got the certain impression that these aliens were constructed like certain insects we have observed on Earth, wherein, because of the low mass, the inertial forces involved in operation of these instruments would be quite low. And then he finishes by saying, I still do not know why the high order of classification has been given and why the denial of the existence of devices. But he admits they were there.
What happens to people like yourself who try to dig this stuff out? I mean, is there any danger involved?
There have been a lot of people killed over this. I don't fear for my life because I'm not talking to any huge, great... It's usually if you're talking to a lot of people that bothers them. But local shows, 300-400 people at the library, that's not very threatening to them.
You're saying the government kills people who talk about this stuff? Or
Absolutely.
Who get this information out?
Absolutely.
It's that vital for them to keep it quiet?
It's that vital that it's kept secret. And shortly, I think we'll know something. I don't think they can keep it a secret any longer. But let's go back to July of 1947 and see if we can figure out why they had to keep it a secret.
We'll do that as soon as we come back. Lear, we were just returning to July of 1947. That's when the first crash of what some researchers believe is an alien craft occurred in Roswell, New Mexico.
Near Roswell, New Mexico. They crashed on July 2nd. It was found by the rancher Mac Brazel on the 3rd. It was the July 4th weekend, so he didn't get into Roswell until the 6th. He went to the sheriff, and the sheriff sent him to the Air Force, and he wound up going to Jesse Marcel, who was the chief intelligence officer. He takes Marcel back up to the ranch, and they gather this stuff up, and they take it back down. They're ordered to fly it to Wright-Patterson, but Jesse Marcel, who was to accompany it, they stopped him at Carswell. It was an in-flight diversion, and they were met by General Ramey, who held a press conference and told everybody it was a weather balloon. Now, consider, if you will, the position of the United States government at this time. They proudly thought of themselves as the most powerful nation on earth, having recently produced the atomic bomb and won World War II with it. They had built a jet aircraft that exceeded the speed of sound in flight, or would, in October of 47. They had built bombers with intercontinental range that would carry weapons of enormous destruction. Now, imagine what it was like for these same leaders, all of whom had witnessed the panic of the Orson Welles broadcast in the War of the Worlds of 1938. Thousands of Americans panicked at a realistically presented invasion of Earth. But imagine their horror as they actually viewed the dead bodies of the real aliens, frightening little creatures with enormous eyes, reptilian skin, and claws at the end of their fingers. Imagine their shock as they tried to determine how these saucers were powered and could discover no part even remotely similar to components they were familiar with. No cylinders, no pistons, no propellers, no vacuum tubes. It's only when you fully understand the overwhelming helplessness the government was faced with in the summer of 1947 can you comprehend their perceived need for a total, thorough, and sweeping cover-up to include the use of deadly force.
You believe that the cover-up has continued all these years, that the government has tried to maintain some sort of relationship with these alien beings, but you also believe that perhaps we're planning some sort of a defensive strategy these days?
Yes, we have to let the information out. There is a problem with the aliens. I don't know what the problem is. I do know that the government is quite concerned at this time, and I think the information will be coming out shortly.
I mean about Star Wars. You believe maybe there's a connection between the creation of Star Wars?
I believe Star Wars has something to do with it. I don't think Star Wars has anything to do with Russian missiles. It may be that we built some kind of a weapon to protect ourselves.
When you say you don't know what the problem is with the aliens, you do know what the problem is, don't you? You have an idea, don't you?
I have an idea. I think that when we made our deal to get the weapons technology, that it was a double cross, that they were abducting far more people than we had any idea, and we didn't get the technology. We got a little bit, but not what we thought. And I think the government has gotten themselves into a problem that's so enormous, it was probably the biggest mistake in the history of mankind.
You also, you found this other document that comes our way through the Department of Transportation in Canada. Now, why don't you tell us what...
This was an accidental, I think, FOIA release, Freedom of Information Act, because Dr. Smith, Department of Transport in Canada, actually says in this second page, talking about saucers, A, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. B, flying saucers exist. C, their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. Here's Bush again. And D, the entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance.
And this is dated 1950, so even way back then, we were sharing this information with other governments?
With Canada at least, yeah.
What does Nellis Air Force Base say when you call them up and ask them, hey, what about these flying these saucers up here, is taking them apart and trying to fly them up at Groom Lake?
Well, remember, when you're talking to Nellis Air Force Base, you're talking to a PIO officer who probably maybe has secret or top secret clearance, and as I said, there's 38 levels of clearances above top secret, so he would not even have the remotest idea of what's going on there. So he is honest when he says, there are no aliens, there are no extraterrestrial craft, because it would not be on his level. He would have not even the remotest idea what was going on.
We've got about 30 seconds left. I asked you this in the beginning. I'd like to ask you again. What do you think they want if they're really here? If these really are UFOs from outer space, what do they want?
I think that the government released a movie here on another network. It was called Somebody Is Out There. And the whole thrust of the thing was the regeneration of their race. I think they may be on the backside of a genetic curve, and they're looking to regenerate themselves.
John Lear, we're going to try to have you back next week. Thank you for joining us. See you next week. Joined us last week were probably amazed as I was by some of the latest research in the field of UFOs. There's so much to talk about, however, we were unable to fit it all into one program, so my guest again this week is UFO researcher, former state Senate candidate, and award-winning pilot John Lear. Mr. Lear, nice to have you here again.
Always a pleasure to be here, George.
To begin with, we have this concept of the people from other planets as little green men. Are they green from what you know? Are they all the same, or we got different kinds of them?
George, there's at least 70 different species, and probably more. But yes, as odd as it sounds, there are little green men. That's not the ones we usually see, though. We see the little gray ones that are about 4.5 feet tall, and we see the ones that are called the Nordics. They're about 7 feet tall, look like us, but they're invariably blonde hair and blue-eyed. They're one of the species that we have on ice. One of their crashes were recovered.
Obviously, with different species, they have different motives. I mean, are there good aliens and bad aliens?
Good aliens
what you know?
and bad aliens, and all kinds of ways and reasons for interacting with us.
What are some of the reasons? Why would they be here?
Genetic experiments, trying to... there's a misconception here. People think that our space brothers would bring us, good things and teach us how to get rid of all our diseases. And if you stop and think about it, that may not be the best thing, because if you had a society without any disease and everybody starts living 150 years, that creates a lot of problems. So they would not meddle in that way.
You believe, in part, that the movies E.T., Close Encounters of the Third Kind, were not entirely just the creative products of some Hollywood director, that maybe there's more to that. Why don't you explain?
They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ-12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens. And in both those movies, they used small little creatures and in order to get us ready for this release of information.
So to prepare us that the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space are going to help us out.
Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent. So they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures, but that isn't the case.
Why don't you take a couple of minutes? Now, you've done as much research on UFOs as just about anyone, I'd imagine, and if you haven't done it, you know people who have. Where did it all start, and how have we put this picture together of where they came from and why they're here?
Well, the whole thing started in July 2nd, 1947. That was the first crash.
First crash of an alien spaceship.
Of an alien spaceship. July 6th is when they recovered it and sent it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. July 7th is when they held the press conference and told the people it was a weather balloon, which the press bought hook, line, and sinker. September of that year, President Truman established MJ-12, and the purpose of that was to study the saucers and cover up the existence of UFOs.
Now, you say we recovered alien bodies from that incident, right?
4 from that particular crash, yes.
And what'd they do with them?
They autopsied them. Dr. Detlef Bronk was the chief surgeon, so to speak. He was the one that named them EBEs. It stands for extraterrestrial biological entities. And we captured 3 live EBEs. They were numbered in their order of capture: EBE-1, EBE-2, and EBE-3.
Where did we capture? Where did this happen?
In different crashes. EBE-1 lived with an Air Force colonel between 1949 and 1952. The EBEs are kept in an electromagnetic facility called a YY-2 It was designed by a Dr. Eric Wang, who worked directly for Dr. Kissinger, who has been in this cover-up since the very beginning. The reason they had to create an electromagnetic facility is the fact that the EBEs are so advanced. They're at least 500 million years advanced from us, and probably more. They can move by thought.
Move by thought.
And they can also disappear. But they can't move by thought through electromagnetic facilities. So they built this facility. There was two, one in Los Alamos, and one either Edwards or up at the test site.
At Groom Lake, Nevada.
At Groom Lake. Now, there's still one EBE still living, EBE3, and there is a videotape that eventually is going to be released to the public, and it's an interview with him. As hard as that may sound, as hard as that may be to believe, there is a videotape of an interview with EBE3.
And what is this language that the interviewers are?
I haven't seen the tape, so I don't know. But on this trip I told you I took gathering all this information, a guy in Albuquerque handed me 25 secret CIA memos. And if anything can be humorous in all of this, one of these memos, in the body of the text, it said, by the way, EBE3 wants to see the ocean. We better make the arrangements or he'll disappear again. So while he couldn't get out of this facility, he could make himself disappear and cause him a lot of trouble.
Now, can they exist among us? Is that what you're saying, or do they have to have this special environment?
They have special environment, special air. It's my understanding they can only last about 20 minutes in this air.
You were saying also these gray ones are the ones that we see most of the time, and you said that most of that there are a lot of different motives for them being here. The gray ones, what kind of a deal we got going with them? Is that the bunch that you suggest we've made a deal with for military technology?
Well, I think we made a deal with them, and their ultimate, what they want to do is regenerate their own race. Now, apparently, they've either had some kind of nuclear accident, or they're on the backside of a evolutionary genetic curve, and they're going downhill instead of uphill. In other words, in the autopsies, of which I have 2, we found out that their digestive system is atrophied. They can't eat through their mouth anymore. You know how they eat? Well, these cattle mutilations, they take the hormones and the enzymes from those cattle and they spread it on their skin, and their skin absorbs the nutrients and then excretes the waste back through their skin. And if you read Whitley Strieber's book or listen to him talk, he talks about when he's seen them doing this to their skin, and they're scraping the waste off.
Now, these cattle mutilations, there's been a film made about that, and perhaps in a couple of minutes we can take a look at some excerpts of that.
Yeah, Strange Harvest was a good one, but another thing that happened here on March 4th, there was a documentary released on the best UFO photos that have been taken so far, including 1 minute and 38 seconds of videotape. Now, what happened is in November, this guy took these photos, took it into the TV station. They thought it was great, but nobody would believe it. So they spent 3 months checking the validity of authenticating the videotape and checking out the credibility of the witness. And when they had it all down, they put out this documentary, 30 minutes. I mean, it's ironclad. They're here. But do you think it got on the network? No, it was just showed locally in Pensacola.
We have some of that, and perhaps when we come back, we can take a look at it. So stay with us for more of On the Record. Researcher John Lear. John, you say this documentary was put together in Florida recently, and it's some pretty stunning stuff.
Pensacola, Florida, and they've had all kinds of physicists and scientists look at the film. It's absolutely authentic. There is nothing fraudulent about it, and it's really interesting. I can't understand why the networks didn't pick it up, because each one is controlled by a member of MJ-12.
That's quite a claim, but we're going to take a look at the film now and see if it's worth suppressing.
Things were very normal around the house, just a normal evening. My wife says she's got to run to the store. Anyway, I'm sitting at my desk. Out the window, I noticed something, a glow. I got up and walked around outside and looked. It just didn't look like a helicopter or an airplane. I realized that it was not something normal. I thought of calling the police, and I said, well, I better take a picture first. I had no feelings I was going to be, hurt or anything. I took 4 shots and ran out of film, and again in my mind, take some more pictures. I ran back in, took the last package of Polaroid film out, opened up and crammed it in there, because the thing's flying around out there, get it quick. it either saw me or whatever, because it started coming. It altered its course. It started coming my direction.
That was November 11th, 1987, about 6 o'clock in the evening. A Gulf Breeze resident who insists on remaining anonymous took these photographs. Charlie and Doris Summerby say they saw the same thing that night over East Bay.
And suddenly, Dory said, "Look, that's our Sally." I'll be down. There were portholes. We saw portholes of light coming out of the portholes.
And over the next 3 months, many more pictures would be taken. By different people. And videotapes, too.
And I feel that there's absolutely no sign of a hoax, that the photographs are genuine, that the witnesses are telling the truth, and that this presents probably the best, without any doubt, the best photographic evidence in 40 years of UFO investigation.
As this series goes on, we see a lot more of that videotape evidence.
Yeah, there's a minute and 38 seconds of it, and it's
pretty interesting stuff. We've never seen that before, have we?
it's great. And on one morning, he goes out with his camera, and 3 of them show up, and he has a spectacular shot of 3 of them. And on one of the shots, they tip the saucer so that they can see up in the inside in the bright glowing ring of however it's powered.
Take it that's not a weather balloon. The government wouldn't contend it's a weather balloon.
No, that's for sure.
How does the government explain this, or has anyone ever put the question to them?
Nobody's put the question to them because they've still got their stock response is the Air Force quit investigating UFOs in 1969.
What do you suppose that bunch wanted? They knew pictures were being taken of them. Why were they hanging around there?
It's got something to do with what's going on now, and I can't even fathom what's going on. But it shouldn't be too long before we find out.
A lot of stuff has happened in the interim between July 1947 and that incident we just saw. You were going to bring us up.
I was going to tell you that a lot of Air Force pilots and planes have been, the pilots have been killed and the planes destroyed. The first one was the Thomas Mantell crash, January 7th, 1948. He was in a P-51, and he was chasing a flying saucer, ordered to chase one, and he got up to it and said, "Oh my God, it's huge," and that's the last thing they heard of him. 1948 was the second crash of a flying saucer near Aztec, New Mexico. 1950 was the third crash near Laredo, Texas, about 30 miles inside the Mexican border. 1952, we had 2 weekends in a row where the UFOs flew over the Capitol, Washington, D.C., buzzed the White House. Despite pictures and radar confirmations of the objects, the Air Force said it was a temperature inversion.
Now, did this ever make the newspaper back in 52?
It made all the newspapers, but it's been such a fantastic mental programming that we've been forced to forget this. It was in the papers. It was one of the most spectacular UFO events in history. 2 weekends in a row.
In the newspapers, I don't know if you've gone back and looked at the newspapers from that era, but how did the newspaper people explain what it was?
They told the Air Force line it was temperature inversion, but they had pictures of them. And it just said it was temperature inversion.
And what happened after that? What's next?
The government established an intensive program of ridicule against anyone who said they saw flying saucers. And fear of ridicule was the foundation on which the cover-up was placed. Nobody likes to be ridiculed. And they built that fear into anybody so that nobody would talk about it. 1952, Eisenhower was elected. He was briefed by Hill and Cotter. Eisenhower, being military, took steps to ensure that the secret was kept. Because of his military background, he made it more military-oriented than, say, a civilian president would have. And it's this, I think, that has let his actions let the real power of the executive office slip through the hands of the president into MJ-12.
Now, we've got a copy of, I think, outside of that document where Eisenhower is briefed in that.
He was briefed, and he set it up. And interesting thing, in late 53 or early 54, Eisenhower witnessed an alien demonstration of technology and power at Muroc Dry Lake, which is now called Edwards Air Force Base.
How do you know that? How did
We
you
have
get that?
witnesses who were there.
The president was there
The
seeing...
president was there. There's an English guy. He passed away. He either passed away just recently, but before he did, he was the last living person who was present at that meeting. And he said that Eisenhower told the aliens that the world was not ready for him. And nothing happened until the first part of the 60s. Several more crashed in the 50s. In 1960, Kennedy was elected. Eisenhower was the last president to have a full briefing on the alien problem. There was a disdain of elected officials throughout the intelligence and military communities, and they just didn't like elected officials. So every president since then has not had high enough clearance to know the whole problem. Now they know there's aliens, they know we've recovered saucers, and they know that we're trying to get technology. But there are certain other things which probably only about 25 people on the face of this earth know. Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenager, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate, and they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time, and number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate. So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says, let's consider an event that could possibly happen in the future or may have already happened. But it did already happen, but what happened then?
I'm jumping ahead of you here, and we can backtrack a second, but the next president after Nixon, President Carter, I remember him as a candidate saying that one of the things he'd like to do when he got into office was to get to the bottom of this UFO stuff, to look into the Project Blue Book files, and to let people know, basically to open it up and let people know if it was a hoax, it's a hoax, and if there's something more to it. But he never did that.
No, he said when he was during his campaign, he said, if I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one. But MJ-12 got to him, and they explained how important it was to keep it a secret. And apparently he agreed with him because we never heard anything from Carter.
Okay, what else? In between Nixon and Carter, anything?
The end of the 60s when I believe we made a deal, 1973, 1980, were cattle mutilations. 14,000 cattle mutilations all over Canada, United States, South America, and we believe that they used the parts of the cattle for food or genetic experiments. And there was a documentary made by Linda Moulton Howe called Strange Harvest.
Okay, perhaps we can take a short break. When we come back, we can go to that because I think it's a little bit long. We'll be right back. We're about to see part of a documentary. John, perhaps you could introduce it. It deals with the 14,000 cattle mutilations that happened.
That's right, and we're particularly prevalent around Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And it was a documentary made by Linda Moulton Howe for the CBS affiliate in Denver.
And let's take a look at that now, a piece of it.